Hello, everyone. Okay, so now I've handed back your assignments on George Orwell's Politics in the English Language, and after this, we're going to take a little break from Orwell, move on to Plato. But before we do that, um, I've given you all individual feedback. If you want some more of that, that's fine. Contact me. We can book an appointment, and I'll go through your essay with you and help you out on an individual level. I also compiled this document, common problems and how to fix them. So these are things I often see in undergrad papers, and I'm going to talk about it. And the document that I'm going to refer to here as I talk on this video can also be found on the website. So what you want to do is get that document, have it in front of you, and so you can follow along with it as you watch this video. So you can basically mimic what I'm doing. So that's what I'm going to be looking at on my screen just over here. I have the document. So page one. So common problems. Many of you didn't use the template that I provided. You tried to copy it and you made some errors in that. Use the actual template, download it, and insert your material right into it. You don't have to do any of that extra formatting. I did that already. So make sure you use the document. Some of you are typing in bibliographies. That's not necessary to do in today's age. Use the word processor. Figure out how to do it. It's well worth your time. Go to my website, or sorry, my YouTube channel, and have a look at my videos on that. I give you a link on this document as well. Don't put extra spaces in between paragraphs. Some of you put spaces all over the place. Not necessary. There's a sample MLA paper that I've given you. I've given you a link to it. You can have a look at it and see how it's formatted. MLA, basically the spacing is the same right through the document. So no big spacings in between headings and paragraphs and whatnot. Nope, just nice and clean, double spaced all the way through, even with your quotations as well. Don't use bulleted lists. Some of you in your summaries had bulleted and numbered lists. I know Orwell does that fine. He's Orwell. You're not to do that. Not at least for this course. I don't want to see that. So again, formatting for MLA formatting for pagination, top right hand corner, surname, page number. And again, look at that sample MLA document that you can find. You can see exactly how it's done. Some of you are a little wobbly on your grammar. You're going to have to work on that. And there's a number of ways to do it. It's try not to get overwhelmed by it. Don't try and solve all your grammar problems at once. The key is to find one or two of your problems, fix those, get it right, move on. So as I say, yeah, I give you the example of the use of the comma in English. Some of you use commas everywhere. Some of you never used a comma. So when in doubt, leave it out. But a lot of you used commas to join two independent clauses. If you're not sure what an independent clause is, you need to do some grammar review. Roughly, an independent clause is like a little piece of text that can stand by itself. Like I give you an example. I went to the store. I went to the store is an independent clause. That could function as a sentence. So a comma splice, for instance, an inappropriate use of a comma would be if you join two independent clauses with just a comma. That's a comma splice. So the example I give you, I went to the store, comma, I did not buy anything. That's a comma splice. So learn how to use your commas. That's first step in cleaning up your punctuation, your grammar, and all those kinds of issues. And you can go to the Owl Purdue website. They have exercises on the use of the English comma. Note that languages aren't all the same with respect to their punctuation and their grammar, of course, because, for instance, French punctuation functions a little differently than English. So you can't just lift, maybe if your mother tongue isn't English, you can't just lift how the use of commas and things work in another language and put them right into English and assume you're correct. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. So check that out. All right, so that's one thing to work on your use of commas. All right, so that's basically page one. On to page two. Yeah, lots of you use the word however incorrectly. You used it like it functions like and. I went to the store, however, I didn't buy anything. However is not like and. It doesn't function in the same way in English. If you say, I went to the store, however, I didn't buy anything, you need a semicolon in there. And I give you an example of how to use it. This is a common mistake. Lots of you make this error where you think however means and or functions like and. However doesn't join independent clauses like and does. So have a look at the document. I give you a couple examples that are wrong uses of however and an example of the right use of however. So with just that, you can clean up a bit of your writing if you just, learn the use of however, a little bit of the semicolon, and on the comma. Don't try and take everything on at once. Go piecemeal. Find a problem you have, zero in, learn how it's done properly, fix it, then move on to a different problem. Many of you, when you submitted your essays, they would come in with all the grammatical and error issues already indicated by Word. Remember, Word will help you with your grammar and spelling and all that. I found spelling mistakes that weren't corrected, and yet they're underlined, double scored by Word. So that's just a problem with proofreading. So, not a great excuse for that. Go through it and look at what Word is telling you. It often tells you these basic mistakes. Even with the however and comma splices, Word will often point those out to you. So make sure you do that. That is, you look at Word carefully and what it's telling you has gone wrong. Word's not perfect at this, but it's actually pretty good. And it can catch a lot of elementary mistakes and help you avoid them, and then it boosts your grades. Why not? Quotation marks. A lot of you overuse them. You use them everywhere. Some people use them for emphasis. Like I was in a hurry to get to the store. There's no use for quotation marks there. Some of you would use the quotation marks definitely have a function, so you have to learn how they're used properly. Like quotation marks are obviously used for quotations. So in the middle of a sentence, if you drop a piece of text from another author's work, of course you use quotation marks. But you don't use quotation marks if you take a big piece of text from another author, put it in your essay, and then block it off. You don't use quotation marks there. So it's not the case that every quotation is surrounded by a quotation mark. So you'll have to learn how these are used. Go to the MLA website that I talked about earlier, get that sample MLA essay, and look how the quotation marks are used. So I give you a few more examples on the incorrect use of quotation marks and some correct ones. So have a look at the document, my document for that. Titles of essays are in quotation marks, not italics. And also, the nice thing about formatting is if you have a title of an essay in quotation marks, you don't have to say it's an essay. The quotation marks tell you it's an essay. Just like the italics of a book, like you don't have to say George Orwell's book titled 1984. You could just say George Orwell's 1984, and if the 1984 is in italics, the reader knows, according to the conventions, it's a book title. So a lot of verbosity, like extra words, wordiness, where when you would explain the formatting, you don't have to explain the formatting. The formatting itself helps shrink or shorten the number of words necessary to convey the same amount of information. So that's the beauty of formatting. It's like shorthand. So, but it is something to learn and something to get right. So there's no way around it. You have to learn it. It's a little dreary, I admit, but when it's done right, it makes a text more aesthetically pleasing and elegant. And that's what MLA is trying to get, a text that flows quickly and smoothly without, a lot of extra words and phrases and things like that. The formatting helps take care of that and basically lets the content shine through. That's what we want in our writing, is not to block our content, but to enhance it. So go to the Purdue Online Writing Lab. I give you another link on the document, so lots of links. And the last thing on page 2 is, writing in the active voice. Remember, Orwell says, write in the active voice. He doesn't say that you always must write in the active voice. There are certain places. He was a journalist. Journalists often write in the passive voice, especially when you think of a headline, like, person killed last night or some terrible thing, where you don't know who did the killing. You don't know the subject. You just know the result. Somebody hurt in an accident. Those are passive ways of writing headlines. That's common in journalism. It's common when you don't know what the subject or who the subject was, what was, doing the action. You would use a passive voice. But by and large, in academic writing, whenever you can, says George Orwell, and I agree with him, whenever you can use the active voice, use the active voice. It makes your writing more assertive, more direct, easier to follow, more aesthetically pleasing, makes for better writing. But again, remember rule 6. If you can't follow one of the rules, by all means, jettison the rules if the rules will lead you to write barbarism. So if you have to twist something up to get it into the active voice and it's more elegant in the passive, use the passive. But always use the active over the passive if you can. Oh, last thing on page 2 is some papers flip back and forth between Orwell and George Orwell. Rule is simple. When you first introduce an author, it would be, in our case, George Orwell. And then for the rest of the paper, just say Orwell. So you don't have to keep saying George Orwell, and don't flip back and forth. One of the rules about writing, academic documents and writing in general is be consistent. So George Orwell, and then after that, Orwell, Orwell, Orwell. And sometimes you can use a pronoun like he or whatever, but by and large, the sort of levels of formality here it's better to go with Orwell. Just the surname. Never say George. Don't act like you knew the guy, unless you actually did. But in normal ways of writing in academia, especially, you would say just the surname after about subsequent mentions. All right. Page 2. Don't use capital letters to emphasize points. A few of you did that. And don't use quotation marks to emphasize a point, right? Quotation marks are not used for emphasis. They have a variety of purposes. And I give you an example of using quotation marks for non-quotations. So, like an example, Plato held that the mind's eye could see mathematical truths in the way that the eye could see the light of the sun. Notice the word see is used in 2 different ways there. The non-standard way is the mind seeing a truth, right? It doesn't literally see it like your eye sees light. It sees truth. So that's why sees is in quotation marks there. It's an analogous or a slightly non-standard use of the term see. And so when we say, I see what you mean, you're not really saying that you actually visually see it like you see that cat on the mat or you see this book. That's a use of see that wouldn't have quotation marks. But if you say, I see your meaning, it's also like when you say, yes, I have grasped your meaning. Well, you grasp with your hands. When you say you grasp with your mind, that is another non-standard use of the term grasp. So quotation marks would be for unorthodox, unusual, non-standard, analogously related ways of using words. So not for emphasis, right? And so a lot of you, make that mistake. So you can clear that one up. So, again, with quotation marks, take it easy on those things. You don't need them probably nearly as often as you do, as some of you use them. So anyways, you live and learn when you do these things. Several essays, awkward passages. That's common. We all do that. We're all guilty of that. Awkward writing is just, it's the bane of all writers' existence. So there's a number of ways to get around it. You just through a lot of writing and getting a lot of feedback, you get better at it. So you'll just stop writing in an awkward fashion, but you never get rid of it. But one way to start to get rid of it is to recognize that we don't just experience a text simply through our eyes. Think about your ears and the role that they can play, and put them to use, right? They're tools, that they're instruments as well. So for instance, after you've written something, put it aside, then read it out loud. Hear how it sounds. If you find yourself, as I go into more details here, if you're stumbling over passages, chances are they're awkward. Whenever someone goes up and gives a speech, if you ever watch someone and they give a speech and in the middle of the speech they'll pause or kind of stumble over things, that's usually they're hitting an awkwardly written passage. So the ear can be often more sensitive to than the eye to the written text. Sounds a little odd, but think about how a great actor or a great singer can make words, sound quite different than they do if you just read them. It's not as much fun to read, let's say, a Shakespeare play than to listen to some great Shakespearean actor. So don't neglect your ears. It sounds a little odd. Don't neglect them. They can play a vital role in improving the quality of your writing. And writing is not just conveying information, right? Of course it's that, but it's also conveying it in an aesthetically pleasing style. So we're trying to work on that. A number of you said you really enjoyed George Orwell's writing. And I don't think by that you just meant you thought it was interesting. You just liked the way it was written. So a clearly written text is quite a pleasure of not just the pleasure of learning something, but the pleasure of the experience of getting information in a nice way. We strive for clarity when we speak. Isn't it nice when someone speaks clearly, right? It's not just the information, it's the mode in which it's conveyed. So, and aesthetically pleasing, an aesthetically pleasing text is not ornate and flowery. So don't confuse aesthetically pleasing with simply flowery and colorful and all this. Don't try and be overly fancy. Sometimes a very aesthetically pleasing text is short, to the point, and kind of in a sense like punchy. It gets its point across clean and crisp and in a clear way. And so it could be the exact opposite of flowery text. Let's see, the last bit on page 3, summarizing, not just giving a laundry list. Some of you have felt that you're going to throw the whole kitchen sink in, right? And you tried to list everything, and then Orwell said this, then that, then this, then that, and then this, and then. That's not really a summary, right? That's like a cataloging or a laundry list. What I mentioned in the instructions was you're going to have to make some decisions when you summarize. What's the key point or key points, or what do you think is sort of the overall thing that Orwell's trying to go for, and how does he support it? That's what you're looking for in a summary. And I mentioned in the instructions, it's an analytic summary. So there is analysis involved in the summary. It's not just going out and trying to shorten it, but still capture all the points, because maybe there are some points in there that are important, but it might not be critical for the overall, shall we say, the overall thrust of the text. They could be subsidiary points, and there are decisions to be made when you construct a summary. Some use the terms then the module on critical thinking. Good, like to see that. But remember the goal of learning these terms is to use them correctly. So be careful. A number of you tried to use them, which I applaud, but you kind of made some mistakes on using them. So what's a common mistake? Remember that an argument is a structure with two main parts, namely premises and a conclusion. And so in the context of this assignment, the conclusion is your opinion. And the actual argument, which contains the conclusion, consists of premises which you use to support your conclusion or your opinion. So some of you said things like, like my view of Orwell is X, whatever that happens to be. And then you'll say my argument is X. No, actually, your view is your conclusion. So what you want is to provide the actual set of premises that support it. So have a look. I laid it out for you in the document as it should be. So you want to use the term argument. That's great. But you want to make sure that you're using it correctly. So the opinion is not the argument. The opinion is actually the conclusion. The whole argument has the opinion as the conclusion, and the argument also contains a set of premises which supports the conclusion. All right, so that's it for the first 3 pages. And I'll pick this up in the next video, and we'll finish the entire document.